Welcome to the Fantasy Champions Fantasy Football Podcast. Here's your host, Morgan Colby and Rick Lemon.
Welcome to the Fantasy Champions Fantasy Football Podcast. My name is Morgan Colby. I got Rick Lemon with me. What's going on, Ricky?
What's up? Still in the bunker.
Still in the bunker. At some point, we will come together.
Maybe next year.
Maybe next year. We got some stuff to get to in this episode. We're going to talk about our favorite or top league-winning players for the 2020 fantasy football season. We've talked about in the past how important it is to have a league winner on your team because you have to win the league.
Yeah, no, league winners, though, like, I feel like every time you look at a championship team,
there's always
a few players that are on like every championship winning team. Last year was Lamar,
right?
McCaffrey was up there. Aaron Jones, Michael Thomas, players like those.
Let's before we jump into a discussion,
okay,
let's check out our website, thefantasychampions.com. Follow us on Twitter at the FFChamps, on Instagram at thefantasychampions. Like us at facebook.com/thefantasychampions. Subscribe wherever you listen, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher. If you're on YouTube, click that bell on YouTube for notifications and then leave a comment for the good, faithful audience. Leave a review and share this podcast with your friends. We also have the draft guide, which is live. It's $25. And you get your full rankings, breakouts, busts. We have video breakdowns coming soon to the guide, so be sure to keep an eye out for that. If you order now, you will get a chance to beat us in our listener league, so be sure to check that out. And then tell your friends about the draft guide, please, for the love of God.
Yeah, tell your
Support
friends
the show.
about it.
Tell your friends about it and lose your league. Let's jump right into league-winning players. Like we were just discussing, now, so there are some guys, like, for me, I love Ezekiel Elliott. I draft him almost every year, and Zeke is a beast. But sometimes players like that they get you where you need to be because they're studs, but they don't win you leagues. League winners, I think, generally speaking, are players that you draft not in the first round, second, third, fourth, and beyond, that you didn't expect to exceed you didn't expect to exceed the way they were playing and become, the number one player in fantasy football or, a top 3 or 4 player in fantasy football. Dalvin Cook last year, he had trouble at the end of the season kind of leading people to championships. Didn't he get hurt?
He did. He got hurt in week 14, I think. So when the playoffs started.
So you kind of had trouble with, Dalvin Cook in that respect or that regard. But it's people like Dalvin Cook who you draft in the second round, or last year Michael Thomas was a second round pick in some people's leagues. And those players broke out. Or you have players who just play absolutely ridiculously, like Christian McCaffrey, and dominate. But that's a given for people who had first round picks or second round picks last year. But anyway, so these are players that could have a chance. They may have not had the same amount of success that they would have in this upcoming season. So we're going to give you our favorite league winners. Super important for your team's success in 2020. Make sure you have these guys on your team. Some of them. You don't need all of them because the ADPs are close.
Right. Some of these guys it's very close.
So let's talk about some running backs to start, and then we'll go into some wide receivers and then jump into some one quarterback that we'll talk about. But so the first guy on this list, I have grown my love this week of Miles Sanders, and I'm trying to calm myself because I looked at some numbers, my friend, and Miles Sanders is insane. So typically a top 5 running back is, especially in half PPR and PPR, is a player who can get 50 or more catches. That's usually a trait that top 5, top 6 running backs share. Guys that can average 20 fantasy points per game, they usually share that. They can catch the ball 50 or more times in a season trait, and then they also have the ability to be extremely efficient on the ground and score touchdowns, generally speaking. Miles Sanders last year, it was a roller coaster. He had the job at the beginning of the season, lost it to Jordan Howard. Jordan Howard got hurt. He took the job back and then didn't look back. And so Miles Sanders has the opportunity to do some great things. The interesting thing about Miles Sanders is that last year, I think he had 64 targets for 50 catches, and he did not get the full workload. I think he only had like 50 to 60% of the snaps. So Miles Sanders got the amount that you're looking for in terms of receiving work in half the workload. This year, no backup running back besides Boston Scott. He's going to get 250 plus rushes on the ground. He's going to get 60 to 70 targets through the air. He's probably going to catch 50 to 55 balls. And the big question for me is not whether he's going to get, enough yardage or anything like that. It's just touchdowns. I mean, last year I had 6. So assuming the Jordan Howard goal line roll, Miles Sanders now probably can score 12 to 14 touchdowns. And I mean, for me, at first I was thinking, Miles Sanders, the hype's too much. It's too much. He's a first round pick. And I'm like, I don't know. He just might be that good. I keep looking at him and seeing, you remember Dalvin Cook last year? We were excited about Dalvin Cook, but he kept on pushing up and up and up and up the draft board. He ended up like early second round, late first round pick. And then he's a top 3 back. I see that for Miles Sanders this year. I see a player who can average that 20 points per game and get himself into the top 5 and be that good. But at the same time, always temper your excitement for players. But I love Miles Sanders as a league winner for 2020.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of people who are super hyped about Miles Sanders. I think he went with the 108 in our mock draft that we did, our last mock draft.
Yeah.
Or somewhere like he was in the first round.
Somewhere like that.
And it was definitely high. But when you say like he could rush for 12 to 14 touchdowns, like if he does that, dude, he's probably a top 3 running back. I mean, let's look at like what he did last year. So like you said, he's very good receiving back. You've talked about before how usually the top running backs in the league have like around 50 receptions. He did last year.
Right.
With again. And when Jordan Howard went down in the 7 games that Miles Sanders played, he had 103 carries, and he only played the first half of week 17.
Yeah.
So I'm going to say he got 18 carries in that game. He only had 9, but if he would have played the full game and you add, 9 plus 9. So I'm just going to say he would have had 18 carries. That would put him at 111 carries through 7 games. So he would have had about 222 carries through 7 games last season that he was like the quote unquote workhorse back.
Yeah.
Or through 14 games. Sorry.
So
if you give him a 16-game season, he would have been on pace for like 250, 260 carries last season.
On what is it? Pro Football Reference, you can prorate a player's season based on a percentage of weeks. So I took week 11 through 16, which is the weeks you're referring to, and he has 251 attempts and 67 receptions and 10 touchdowns.
Yeah, I mean, that's ridiculous. And as of right now, like, they don't have a second running back. It is Boston Scott, who, in my projections, because I was so high on
I actually like Boston Scott.
I do too. So I was so high on Miles Sanders. I'm like, I'm going to purposely give Boston Scott a lot of work. I gave him
overcompensated.
I did. I gave him 111 carries.
Yeah, right.
I gave him 5 rushing touchdowns for almost 500 rushing yards. I gave him 20 plus receptions. And I still had Miles Sanders as like the RB11 in fantasy.
Wow.
So it's like worst case scenario. Like if he is what like some of the people who are down on Miles Sanders is saying, I still think he's like a low end RB1, high end RB2, like in that range. And where he's going like second round, like late second round, that's kind of what you're like drafting for. So I don't like, I'm very, very high on Miles Sanders this season.
Right.
Almost too high. I still wouldn't draft him in the first round. But like the more I do research on him, like I try to purposely like I do research to hopefully
you try to make him worse.
Away.
It doesn't work.
Yeah, and it doesn't work. It really doesn't work.
And I
continue to love Miles Sanders.
I think you also have to look at the other 2 metrics too of how good their offense is, which Carson Wentz, a bolstered bolstered wide receiver core, 2 talented tight ends. They're going to move the ball. They're going to move the ball effectively. They'll probably be a top 12 offense next year. And the offensive line is good. Despite the fact that they lost one of their best offensive linemen, it's still a very good run-blocking offensive line. So
still top half of the league.
For Miles Sanders, he checks all the boxes in terms of what you're looking for at the running back position. And I mean, one of the most insane statistics that I keep seeing about Miles Sanders is his 80% catch rate. Like usually guys with an 80% catch rate go by the name of Derrick Henry, and they get like 10 targets and 8 catches. And it's like a guy who gets targeted, 50, 60 times in a season and gets an 80% catch rate. I mean, you're talking about a guy that can lock up a lot of receiving work and, have a massive success through the air. So I think for me, like it is for sure worth the investment in late first, especially the early second round. I think he's ADPing at pick 15 right now, and it's hovering. It's been hovering.
So he is moving up
for a month, like right there. It actually went down. He was at 12 or 13. So he's kind of falling back a little bit. But yeah, I think for Miles Sanders, like the more I look at the numbers and the metrics, that's the hardest thing for me is that you want to look at him and go, like I said, we both try not to get so excited about a player that we just overcompensate. And one of the things I've been doing lately, and I don't want to talk about Joe Mixon, but I have been really doing a lot of fine research on Joe Mixon. And, outside of like punching in numbers into a program and seeing how much he can do in projections, you have to look at everything else, and the more I look at everything else for Joe Mixon, the more I get less excited about him. And the more I look at things for Miles Sanders, the more excited I get about him. The more I'm like, wow, you know what? He might actually be that guy. If he does what he did over those 6 weeks that we just talked about, he is going to be a top 5 running back. When he was the workhorse, he's going to be a top 5 running back. And there's no question he's going to get that work.
I've heard a lot of people say like the Doug Peterson likes RBVCs, but like he's never had a running back that
like
could
Miles Sanders,
hold a workload. Yeah, like a Miles Sanders. Like he's had LeGarrette Blount. He's had Jordan Howard, who, by the way, Jordan Howard, when he was healthy, was getting like 18, 20 carries a game.
Yeah.
And he's had like, who was the Eagles running back like 3 years ago? It was they've never had a great running back with Doug Peterson as the head coach.
Yeah.
It's been consistently bums. No offense, but fantasy wise bums.
Yeah. Right.
And players that like are out of
just
the
aren't
league,
great.
usually.
Right.
Yeah. So with Miles Sanders there, and he showed that he could, he will use a workhorse. Miles Sanders was the workhorse for like 6 weeks last season when Jordan Howard went down. And if they just do that again this season, which seems very likely, Miles Sanders can be a top 10 running back or maybe even top 5.
Especially for teams, when you're drafting in a 12 team at, between picks, I want to say 8 and 12 in the first round, you're missing out on all of those really talented running backs. And the guys that you're going to take, the Joe Mixons, the Miles Sanders, the Nick Chubbs, they're going to have some risk attached to them, right? They're going to have a little bit of skepticism attached to them in terms of whether or not they can be, because you can't run your season with a low end RB1. You just can't do it. Your whole season, it'll go down the tubes if your RB1 is trash for a majority of the season, right? And Miles Sanders is just one of those guys that you can get, late first, early second, that may have that ability to be a Dalvin Cook, like player this year. So I really like Miles Sanders. The more you look at the numbers, the more it just lines up for Miles Sanders. And, I got to not get so excited.
Quickly, Doug Peterson took over the Eagles in 2016. His running backs since 2016, his starting running backs, according to Pro Football Focus or Pro Football Reference, sorry. In 2016, it was Ryan Matthews. Right. 2017, it was LeGarrette Blount. 2018, Wendell Smallwood. And then last year was Jordan Howard. So
trash.
Yeah.
All right. Well, even when Jordan Howard was in the game, when he kind of stole the job from Miles Sanders in the early part of the season, he was good, but he was kind of he was in a workhorse role.
Yeah, he was.
And Miles Sanders was getting like third down and passing work. You know what I mean? And that was about it for the midway point in the season. But when Jordan Howard got hurt, Miles Sanders went in full time. I mean, that's what solidified him as why they have not picked up different players. So let's talk about the next guy, the next running back, Kenyan Drake. There are only two guys. If you go to Fantasy Pros and you go to research and check out the stat leaders, and you organize the stat leaders by by target share, or not target share, but receptions, right? I organized it by that, and then I looked to see how many receptions there are. You have Tariq Cohen with 79. You have James White at 72, right? And I'm like, okay, those guys, they're really good at catching the ball through the air, but then you look at their rushing totals, and it's 67 and 64. So they get nothing on the ground. So I'm like trying to find that one player who had a lot of target share, a lot of receptions last year that could actually have a chance this year to get a full workload on the ground and a sizable workload through the air and capitalize on that to turn it into fantasy points. We obviously just talked about Miles Sanders, another guy who spent half the season not starting, and then the second half of the year starting, is Kenyan Drake. And he had 170 rushes throughout the entire season, but he also came down with 50 of his 68 targets. He was a lot less efficient through the air than Miles Sanders was. Miles Sanders had, I believe, the highest yards per reception rate outside of McCaffrey for a player who's started at least half the season at like 10. And so obviously you're not going to see that same number out of Kenyan Drake. I think you're going to get like an 8 or a 9, which is going to be more realistic. That's similar to like what Barkley would do. But anyway, for Kenyan Drake, he's still going to get that 50 receptions, and he's efficient on the ground. When he got traded to Arizona last year, he was averaging, I want to say, was that week 9 that he...
It was week 9 to 17, yeah. Wow.
I'm trying to look up the pacing numbers, but I believe he had an average of 5.23 yards an attempt with the Arizona Cardinals, who have a bad offensive line.
Yeah.
Which is pretty good. He paced out to 246 yards, 246 rush attempts for 1,286 yards, 70 targets, 56 receptions, and 16 all-purpose touchdowns through that stretch of 9 games with that 8-game stretch with the Arizona Cardinals. That is very good. It's very, very good.
That is.
And 16 touchdowns and 1,500 yards. That's Alvin Kamara-like numbers. And Alvin Kamara a couple years ago finished as a top 5 running back. So for me, I'm not basing my entire prediction on Kenyan Drake on just that, obviously. But I think with what Arizona is going to, you essentially know what Arizona is going to do with him, right? He's going to get the full workload, similar to how he's going to get the full workload like he did in this back half of the season last year. They traded David Johnson away just to show you that, we're going with Kenyan Drake. It's our guy. They didn't say we're going with Chase Edmonds. We're going with Kenyan Drake. They want Kenyan Drake to lead the backfield for the Arizona Cardinals. So if you take those pacing numbers and you look at his efficiency metrics and you look at how good he actually is, which I talked about all last offseason, how good Kenyan Drake actually is. He's older, but he's poised. He's poised for a potential breakout top 5 season for Kenyan Drake. And
he might be
Go ahead.
I was just going to say he might be, even though he is older, like you said, he might be one of those guys that, like, this is a career year. This would be a career year for Kenyan Drake.
Yeah, I for sure believe that.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about him a lot in the show. We both love him a lot, especially redraft. Last year when he took over for Arizona, just fantasy-wise, he was the 4th ranked running back in all of fantasy,
right.
PPR. He was ahead of Zeke in points per game. In total points, he was ahead in the same amount of games played. He was ahead of Saquon Barkley, Joe Mixon, Melvin Gordon, Aaron Jones, some Miles Sanders, Alvin Kamara, Nick Chubb. Like, some really good players last year. And he probably would have been ahead of Derrick Henry. Derrick Henry had about 50 points.
We have some breaking news here. We're recording this on a Wednesday. I was just going to say that after
Raheem
Mostert has requested a trade.
Yeah.
Why?
That's interesting. So what I'm reading is that it's about contract. It's about the contract.
I'm kind of shocked.
Talks.
So
yeah, I mean, this is interesting because
that murders Raheem Mostert because he was like about to get the starting role for the 49ers.
Right,
no matter where he goes.
I mean, now Tevin, if the 49ers trade Mostert,
yeah,
and leave the running back core the same, Tevin Coleman becomes like a really solid fantasy. I mean, he's not like top 10 or anything or top 15 for running backs, but he's going to move way up on boards. And I think he should. With the amount the 49ers run the ball.
Do you think I could see this very well happening because Mr. Shanahan has utilized this running back in the past, but Devonta Freeman is a free agent, my friends.
Yeah, he and
Tevin Coleman back on the same team except in back with the same coach except in San Francisco this time.
That actually makes a lot of sense.
That would make a lot of sense for them if they traded Raheem Mostert.
Wherever Mostert goes, it's not going to be good. It's not going to be good for fantasy.
No, yeah, Mostert's dead if he goes somewhere else.
Well, and not only is he potentially dead, but like, let's say he goes to the Eagles.
Don't ruin me.
Right? Like, let's say he goes to the Chargers and Austin Eckler's like.
I think anywhere he goes, it's going to be supplemental. But that's very interesting news. We will dissect and figure that out and probably talk about it on the news segment in more detail next week. But what were you saying about Kenyan Drake?
I mean, I was just pretty much saying how good he was last year, and behind McCaffrey, you can make the argument he was the second best running back in all of fantasy last year.
Right.
And the offense arguably it did get better with DeAndre Hopkins there now. They traded away David Johnson, which just shows how much they believe in Kenyan Drake.
Improved the offensive line, correct? They drafted an offensive lineman, I believe.
They did, yeah. So, I mean, it was in the third round, but he was somebody who fell.
Yeah.
He was a projected late first, early second round pick, and he fell to them in the third round. So, they did add some depth to the offensive line.
Yeah.
I love Kenyan Drake for this year. I think he easily has top 5 potential written all over him. And you can get him in the second round.
Especially, he could be another one of those league-winning type players that we're talking about. You know what I mean? And just sheer opportunity, sheer efficiency with Kenyan Drake, he fits the bill. You know what I mean? And I hate to call him Christian McCaffrey light, but the amount people utilize this guy through the air, you know what I mean? Do you remember Christian McCaffrey the first year he was actually good and ended up like a top 4 back, top 5 back? That's kind of what I see Kenyan Drake being this year. I projected him as a top 4 running back, and I think that he has a lot of good things, about him. And I always talk about that fantasy point per opportunity. I will for the rest of my existence. But Kenyan Drake has a 1 fantasy point per opportunity, even when he was with the Arizona Cardinals and getting all the work. And so that's the exciting factor about Kenyan Drake is that he has that opportunity to be a massively successful player. I've talked about how it always depended on opportunity for him, and that opportunity is here. And it's like we're going to get a full season of Kenyan Drake and finally get to see that end of the second round value. I would definitely jump in the water for that. Especially if you're trending towards if you're in the back end of the second round, you're probably going two running back at that point.
Yeah.
But anyway, let's move on to the next player on our list, wide receiver Chris Godwin. Now, I wanted to do a little bit of research for this particular episode, and so I did some. I was telling Rick before the show, I did a little breakdown of analytics of wide receivers who finished with 18 or more fantasy points per game, which I would consider probably league winner status at wide receiver.
For sure. In half PPR.
In half PPR, 18 fantasy points per game over the last, I think it goes back to 2014, over the last 5 or 6 years. So when I broke down all the numbers, I basically came up with some variables to look at. How many targets did that player get? How good was their offense? Was it a top 12 offense or was it not a top 12 offense? And then, obviously efficiency statistics like yards per reception and touchdowns. So in the last 4 years in particular, in 2019 to 2015, there's only been one wide receiver that has finished with 18 fantasy points per game that has finished with under 160 targets, and that was Odell Beckham Jr. with 158 targets. Generally speaking, wide receivers that finish in the top of points per game finish with about 1,600 yards, which is around 12 to 13 yards per reception, and 8 to 9 touchdowns. So that's generally what you're talking about. I also took all of these players and I listed them by offensive rank, right? And then I created a secondary sheet to make it more simple for my brain to understand. So I just put targets and whether they had a top 12 offense in there. And I came up with a couple of players. Some of them we were discussing back and forth as to whether or not they could be better. There's obviously guys here that might get more target share. But you can't really, you can objectively predict whether or not a player is going to get more target share. You just don't know until the season starts. So it's like, you kind of have to go with guys who have had the target share before. And Chris Godwin comes in last year at 121 targets. So for me, I'm predicting 30 to 35 more targets for Chris Godwin. And here's why. Julian Edelman with Tom Brady always had around 140 to 150 targets. And if Chris Godwin cracks 150 targets, he breaks the threshold for the first category of what makes a wide receiver who can produce 18 fantasy points a game. And then you can assume with the addition of Tom Brady as well that they're going to be a top 12 offense. Am I wrong?
Oh, absolutely.
So
they should be.
You put some of those categories together and the fact that Chris Godwin finished with 13 to 15 yards per reception in his first 2 years in the NFL, he checks all the boxes and he becomes what some would call a top 5 wide receiver in fantasy football. Last year, he was top 2 in 16 weeks?
Yep, he was the wide receiver 2 last season.
So last season, I owned him, and I felt like he was going to be a league winner, but most of his explosive weeks were in the middle of the season, and then when it got to the postseason, he really didn't produce league-winning numbers for me. He was at 14 to 15 points per game, and so I got what I needed from him, but it wasn't an explosive Michael Thomas 20 points a game in week 16, week 15 of the fantasy playoffs, right? So I think you're finally going to see that from Godwin. You could see 18 to 19 fantasy points. I think you're going to see a lot of wide receivers. I think 3, 4, or 5 wide receivers with 18 to 19 fantasy points per game this year. That's going out on a limb. Usually there's 2 or 3. But I think Godwin, if he gets 150 targets with how efficient he is and how well he plays, and the fact that he's probably going to get a lot of the red zone work, I would say that Chris Godwin has an opportunity to be a league winner this year and finally get the numbers that you need in the fantasy playoffs to push you over the top and help you win. And to get that guy, what is he, ADPing at 16, 17, get him in the middle of the second round, he could be this year's Michael Thomas. It's a little bit of a hot take, but it's a possibility. It's in the realm of outcomes for Chris Godwin.
Yeah, all the points you said are extremely valid, and especially the targets one. I think with Julian Edelman getting 140, 150 targets every year, I think Chris Godwin should also get around that range.
Especially, we refer to that as Chris Godwin being the slot receiver. That's why we make that comparison. Not exactly. A lot of people would be like, well, why aren't you projecting Mike Evans to do that? It's because Mike Evans is not a slot receiver.
I still think I still think they'll both do well, but I just think Chris Godwin, by playing in the slot, will be better for Tom Brady. But look at last year. The Buccaneers they had the 3rd best offense in the league with James Winston. You add Gronk and Tom Brady, and efficiency wise, they'll probably be better. They might not have the 3rd total offense in the league just because they're not going to just be throwing the ball every possession and throwing interceptions and then getting the ball back and doing all that. But they'll probably be a top 5 offense in the league.
Yeah. I don't disagree with that. I automatically, when I put top 12 offense in my little spreadsheet here, I just typed yes first on Chris Godwin.
Yeah, I mean Godwin, and then you also look to like it's his 4th year in the league, 24 years old. Like that's perfect breakout age in that like.
I mean, he already broke out. It's just a matter of him exploding onto the scene.
Right now, he's like in the and now that he hit his breakout, he's kind of in prime right now.
I was thinking about it earlier today, and I was like, you have guys that have been like Devontae Adams, DeAndre Hopkins, Julio Jones, right? Michael Thomas. You have these guys last 3-4 seasons who have been the upper echelon at wide receiver in fantasy football, and they've stuck there, and they're always in the top 5 or 6, right? Yep. And it's like, we need a changing of the guard and some new players to come in and take over for guys like Nook, DeAndre Hopkins, who's probably not going to have a great season this year. And it's like
a good year, but probably not as good as like people hope that he will.
I think Godwin can do that. When you look at the boxes that are checked off for him, the only thing that I really question is whether or not he's going to get 150 targets. And I would project him at that just because he is the slot receiver in a Tom Brady-led offense. So if he does that, I mean, it's hard for me not to see Chris Godwin not finishing in the top 5. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I agree. I definitely agree. The only thing that I will say negatively about Chris Godwin is you said like his red zone production. I'm a little scared at that because I think like Evans will still get touchdowns and Gronk.
Yeah. Last year,
stuff like that.
Godwin got a lot of red zone work, so that could be a regression area. Yeah.
But even like if it's like, as I think he'll have a little less touchdowns. Like I think I have projected at 7 touchdowns.
Yeah.
But I have him at almost 100 catches for almost 1,400 yards. So he's still like the wide receiver 5 or 6.
So Julian Edelman too. I mean, I don't want to quote because I didn't do research on whether or not Julian had success. It looks like he had 6 to 7 touchdowns a season with Brady. So consistently 6 the last couple years, and I believe Godwin had 12 last year.
Yes, I think. For touchdowns?
Yeah, he had 9.
He had 9. Yeah.
So I could definitely see Chris Godwin sticking at 8 or 9 through 16 games next year.
Sure.
But I think it's the yardage that's going to. He had 15 yards per reception last year, but I think it's the yardage and the catch rate that's going to improve under Tom Brady. So he only had 86 receptions last year. I think with 150 targets, he can catch 100 balls. And if that's the case, you're talking about a guy who maybe get 15 to 1,600 with 8 or 9 touchdowns. I mean, automatically ends up in your top 5 in fantasy football.
Right. I think Godwin's definitely going to. He's going to get 90 to 100 catches next year for sure if he plays the full 16.
Now, I wanted to honorably mention Juju Smith-Schuster. You can hear our thoughts about him on the previous episode because we talked about him
last show
as a bounce back player. But I also would put him in the league winning category. He's extremely good. Like I said, listen to the last episode to hear our thoughts about Juju. But he could definitely be as a 4th round pick, 5th round pick. He could probably win leagues. So I wanted to throw him out there as a league winning wide receiver as well. But let's talk about DJ Moore. This is a little bit more of a difficult one because there are questions surrounding what the Carolina Panthers did this offseason. Obviously, last year they struggled to throw the football because Cam Newton went down early in the season and they just weren't an efficient offense. Do you want to hear something interesting about what happened with the Carolina Panthers last year? Yeah. They were, I want to say they were the number 17 offense in all of the league with 2 backup quarterbacks running the show. Christian McCaffrey literally led the charge so much with them that they ended up being, that's at least in number 17 in yards per game.
Yeah.
So, that I found really interesting. They added Robbie Anderson in the offseason. They added Teddy Bridgewater. They moved on from Cam Newton. Bridgewater is a pass first quarterback, right? Am I wrong in saying that?
Yeah, I know he is pass first. I mean, he's kind of conservative, but
last year, I've talked about it before. Last year when he was with, New Orleans, a lot of people thought there was going to be a drop off with Mike Thomas, and Thomas ended up performing even, I don't want to say even better under Teddy Bridgewater, but He just got a lot of targets through Teddy Bridgewater. So if Bridgewater has a connection with a guy, most likely it's going to be DJ Moore, and most likely it's going to end up in a lot of targets because Bridgewater likes the safety blanket. And I believe that safety blanket is going to be DJ Moore. Last season, he had 135 targets. The thing that concerns me, if you jump back to my sheet, the thing that concerns me is target share. Now, do you think that Carolina could have a top 12 offense next year, even if it's like 12?
Yeah, no, I think they can.
Okay, so I listed that as maybe. I gave him like a.
I think it's
could
possible.
Happen.
Yeah.
He is above that yards per carry total. Yards per reception total. And he had 135 receptions last year, which is not 150 to 160, right? But it's
135 targets, you mean?
135 targets, yeah. Did I say catches?
Yeah, you did.
Okay.
I was like, wow. That's
so he's moving up in terms of how many targets he's getting a season. You know, in the first year he had 82, now he has 35, and he did that 135 in 15 games. So it's like if you were to, you know, pace that out to a full season, he's somewhere in the ballpark of 145 targets. So I think he can reach 150 to 160 this year. I'm concerned because of Robbie Anderson that he's going to get to 150 and 160 because they got to throw the football somewhere. And it's like they're going to throw it more than they ever have as the Carolina Panthers offense.
Get around 100 targets.
I think
McCaffrey will.
I'm thinking that Curtis Samuel will probably, because we just don't know what Matt Rule's going to do as far as plays called. You know what I mean? Like how many plays is he going to run next year? You can make a guesstimation, but we just don't know until it happens. Yeah. So I actually think that Robbie Anderson's probably going to cut it into Curtis Samuel's work a little bit more than DJ Moore's work.
Sure.
But I don't even think that Robbie Anderson is all that. Like I think he's talented, but I don't think he's coming in to steal work. I think he's just coming in to fill a spot.
Yeah.
So I think he's another body. So the big thing,
I think he'll probably get like 75 to 80 targets.
Right. So the big thing with DJ Moore is just his, you know, he kind of checks some of the boxes. The question of target share and the question of how good his offense is going to be is up in the air. But when you're talking about DJ Moore, what is he, a 5th round pick, a 6th round pick?
He's a 5th round pick right now.
That I'll lock that up every day of the week in the 5th round. I think there's a chance that DJ Moore comes out this year, and I've talked about it before, that he becomes this year's Chris Godwin, right? Where Godwin came in the last year and a lot of people were like, I'm not sure, you know, and for me particularly, I really wasn't sure because I was like, sometimes you don't want to follow the fantasy community's hype because sometimes the hype is just dead wrong and it's blind hype. And Chris Godwin, I felt, was getting that blind hype, but then I looked at his numbers and I'm like, man, and I saw some of his hype videos, you know, of training camp, and I was like, ooh, Chris Godwin.
Yeah.
So I was getting sweaty, and I'm like, 4th round's too early. And in our draft last year, I ended up getting Chris Godwin in the 6th round. I don't even know how he fell there. I was an early 6th round pick. It was like maybe the 2nd pick of the 6th round. And I ended up grabbing Chris Godwin because I'm like, you guys are forcing me to take him. And I ended up winning out on that, and he ended up being really good. I think that's a similar situation with DJ Moore, not in the context that I don't believe in him. It's just lots of question marks. He could get 150 targets and enter the green zone in terms of target share with 18 fantasy points a game, and his offense could be a top 12 offense, but he also could get 125 targets and his offense is garbage. I think at best, it's a top 15 offense, which is still great for DJ Moore. You still draft him, but I don't know if that makes him a league winner. So if they get in the top 10 or top 12, DJ Moore can definitely be a league winner for 2020.
Yeah, absolutely. It really depends on how you believe in.
We should just have Adam do a pre-recorded clip for 10 minutes every time we talk about DJ Moore, and we'll just play that.
I know. I do love DJ Moore, though. And I do think, especially where he's going, he could be a league winner. Like, if you look at last year, the Panthers threw the ball 633 times. Yeah. I don't think they're going to throw the ball that much because they're not going to be,
because they were trash.
I mean, maybe they will be getting destroyed.
They were
in every
trashed.
game, but yeah. But even if, like, you think they could throw the ball like 570-ish, 560-ish,
yeah,
that range, that still will leave a lot of targets for DJ Moore because Teddy Bridgewater does like throwing to that kind of big number one go-to guy like Michael Thomas last year. We saw that he's even with Drew Brees out, Michael Thomas still produced good numbers with Teddy Bridgewater there, so that's good things for DJ Moore. There was only 17 receiving touchdowns last year for the whole Panthers team. If Teddy Bridgewater can throw like 24, 25 touchdown passes, DJ Moore, who only had 4 touchdowns last year.
Yeah, I was just about to say that.
Like and Curtis Samuel had 6. So like, let's say DJ Moore gets 6, 7, 8 touchdowns. Like he can really be a league winner. And like, he has the potential. Like, I do agree with the targets. I'm a little nervous about that because, McCaffrey's still going to get a lot of targets. I still think Curtis Samuel will get around 100 targets. He might be a little under that, but still a lot of targets.
Yeah.
I do think Robbie Anderson will get around like 80 targets, but Greg Olsen is gone, and he got 80 targets last year. So maybe you can say like Robbie Anderson's just going to replace the Greg Olsen production, and Ian Thomas will still only get like 35, 40 targets. But if you believe in Ian Thomas getting targets as well, that's just another guy who's going to get a lot of targets. So the targets is the only concerning thing for me. DJ Moore, because if he's going to get a lot of targets, if he's good enough,
he'll command them.
Yeah. Oh, that's true. I mean, and if he had 135 last year in 15 games played. So if he gets like the same as last year and then plus the one game he missed, so like 140, 145 targets, I think he's going to be a top 10 fantasy wide receiver.
Now, did he leave week 15 with an injury? Because he only had 2 targets that week.
Yes, he did. I'm pretty sure he did.
Okay, because I'll just pace him for the 14 games that he played. I mean, it's 152 targets, 98 receptions, 1,342 yards, 5 touchdowns, and then he has a little bit of rushing. He had 6 rush attempts last year total.
Yeah.
So, I mean, not that that's going to happen this year. I don't know how Matt Rule's going to use him, but it is interesting. And I think you're right. 8-9 touchdowns is probably where he needs to be. I think the efficiency through the air needs to go up a little bit. Like, he needs to get to 1,500, receiving yards and get to 6, 7, 8, 9 total touchdowns in order to have success this year as a league winner. But I think what you're getting like we talked about, what you're getting in the 5th round, regardless of whether he's a league winner or not, is going to be successful. Like, DJ Moore is going to have probably the best season of his career in this new offense. And so, like you said, Greg Olsen had 80 targets last year. Is that what you said?
Yep.
Yeah. So that target share, I mean, not that they're just going to completely obliterate the tight end position, but Matt Rule is a college coach, and college coaches hate the tight end position unless you go to Notre Dame, or I can't remember what the other school is. But it's interesting to know that, because if they send most of those targets Robbie Anderson's way, then you're talking about a team that DJ Moore could most definitely stick at 135 to 140, or even increase on that and get like 140 to 150, or maybe 150 to 160. But target share is the biggest question with DJ Moore, and I think he will get it, and I think he'll have a great season, and that's why he's on our league-winning players list, and you are not going to regret drafting him in the 5th round.
Absolutely not.
The final guy on our list is a quarterback for fun, because why not? I didn't think about Josh Allen this way until recently, but Josh Allen comes in as a league winner. Now, we talked about, what did he finish as the quarterback 6 last year? Something like that, quarterback 6 or 7. Right now, he's going off the board, ADPing in a 12 team in the 8th or 9th round.
Yep.
The year you took Patrick Mahomes in his first successful season in the NFL, the year he threw 50 touchdowns, you drafted him in the 8th or 9th round. Am I wrong?
I think it was like a little bit. I think it was like 10th, but it was in that range.
So Josh Allen has, for most quarterbacks, rushing is what gets them their fantasy points in terms of, if you have a successful top 5 quarterback, rushing is usually what carries people over the mark. 7 years ago, I'll say, that was not the case. Guys like Aaron Rodgers, Peyton Manning, Tom Brady could run the league. I don't even know if Peyton Manning was in the league 7 years ago. Was he?
I think he was.
I don't know.
On the back 9.
But anyway,
he wasn't league.
So, but pocket passing quarterbacks were the guys that were snagging all the fantasy points. And then, I think it was, I can't remember who the first quarterback to come out that was just super athletic. Not the first quarterback to come out that was athletic, but the guy that changed the game is probably Russ. And you started to see a lot more quarterbacks play like Russell Wilson, play like Patrick Mahomes is right now, and play like, a guy who rushes the ball for at least 300 a season, Deshaun Watson. And so it's like the top 5 quarterbacks now are guys that can rush the football. And it's like when you look at Josh Allen's totals last year, 109 rush attempts, 510 touchdowns, and he vultures 510 yards, and he vultures the touchdowns with 9. And I don't think that's going to go down. I think he's going to have 8 or 9 touchdowns again because that's just how he runs, very similar to Cam Newton. I will say that.
Absolutely.
And Cam Newton vultures those rushing touchdowns in the red zone. Just because he can, because he's big and he's like that. And so Josh Allen can do that as well. He's not as big as Cam Newton, but he just likes to run on the goal line when they give him a passing opportunity. So, 510 rushing yards and 9 touchdowns, or even if you want to decrease that a little bit and say 7 touchdowns, that is a lot of fantasy points. It's almost 100 fantasy points just on rushing. And so it's like, for me, when you're talking about 100 fantasy points from rushing and an increase or improvement in their offensive line and adding Stefan Diggs to their roster, who's a legitimate wide receiver, he could throw. Week 16 last year, I think he had 5 attempts in the game. He didn't play at all. And so if you take weeks 1 through 16 and pace him out, he would have had 3,200 passing yards and 21 touchdowns instead of the 3,020 touchdowns that he had. So if he can reach 24 touchdowns and 33 to 3,400 yards, there is a real possibility that Josh Allen could end up the QB2 in all of fantasy, or the QB3. And I think it's a lot of people are like, oh, that's a hot take. And I'm like, I don't know how hot of a take that is. But if you're talking about snagging a guy in the what is the 9th round, 8th round of your drafts, like he could be the Lamar Jackson of last year. He could be the Patrick Mahomes of the previous year, and you could snag that guy and have a league winner on your team. A lot of people think that you're going to get your league winner quarterback in the late rounds. You know what I mean? And like when I say late rounds, I mean like the 15th round, like Lamar Jackson last year, the 14th round. And that's not always the case. Sometimes it's a guy in the 8th, 9th, 10th round of your redraft leagues. Now, if Josh Allen ends up in the 6th round, I'm probably not going to take him at all. But
no, I'm not either.
But I think as an 8th, 9th, or 10th rounder, it's totally worth taking. And he could definitely be a league winner because you're getting especially in a 1 quarterback league, or a 6-point touchdown league, you need to have a guy who has success. Otherwise, you're just going to be streaming, because outside of the top 3, like, there really isn't, like, there's a lot of successful players, but there's not one guy that you can trust on a week-to-week basis. Josh Allen's rushing floor gives you that. So Josh Allen is definitely a league-winning player this year.
Yeah, we've talked about Josh Allen before. Like, I think the reason a lot of people are kind of down on him is because they watch him on Sunday and they're like, this guy's really not good of a quarterback. Yeah. But like numbers wise, which is what fantasy is all about, he produces them. I think 9 rushing touchdowns is a lot, and I'm not expecting him to rush for 9 rushing touchdowns.
No, right. So
he could rush for more yards, though, to be completely honest with you. In his rookie season, he rushed for 7 yards per carry. Last year was 4.7. So there's a chance his yards could go up. There's a good chance his passing touchdowns will go up with Stephon Diggs and his 3rd year as a quarterback. There's a good chance his completion percentage will go up with Stephon Diggs and a better offense.
Yeah.
He's probably going to get more yards. So you add those things up, it's going to make up for not only the rushing touchdowns, but it's going to make up for the fact that he might even be better than the QB6, which he finished last year. So like, even if you get like what he did last year in the 8th or 9th round, you're getting the QB6. That's pretty good value.
Yeah.
And with the potential of being even
as like the 10th, 11th, maybe the 12th quarterback off the board. Definitely.
Yeah. Around that. We did a dynasty draft, like not too long ago. And where did he go? Like the 11th round, like
something like that. Yeah.
It was crazy.
Yeah. And most mocks I'm doing for redraft, I'm getting him in the, Yeah, the 8th, maybe early 9th round.
In 12 team?
In 12 team, yeah.
Yeah,
so
if you're in a 10 team, it's like
9th,
10th round.
Yeah. So I think Josh Allen is definitely that player that could. I mean, I hate to continue saying the name of our podcast episode, but could be a league-winning player for 2020. And I don't know. I mean, I wasn't excited about him because, like you said, it's just so on Sunday. Like you turn the Bills, gross, yeah. You turn the Bills on.
You're gonna hate watching.
And the only thing you want to watch is who's the running back equivalent of Josh Allen? David Montgomery.
Yep.
Draft David Montgomery, but don't watch the Bears play football. Because
that's how it was last year. Yeah.
Monty's gonna average 3.9 yards a carry, and you're gonna throw up every time he rushes it.
But he'll get like 20, 25.
Yeah, but he's gonna be an RB2. High end RB2, but
hopefully.
Yeah, hopefully. Anyway, but Josh Allen, league winner. You have to get these players on your team. It's probably for the best for the 2020 season. If you can get at least 3 of these guys, you're gooch, I guess.
Oh, absolutely.
Thank you for listening to the Fantasy Champions Fantasy Football Podcast. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram. Buy the draft guide, friends. Do it right now. We'll talk to you on Tuesday, Fantasy Champs.
Later.
Thank you for listening to the Fantasy Champions Podcast. Make sure you subscribe on iTunes and YouTube and follow us on Twitter @TheFFChamps.